So Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley is now in the rearview mirror. However, the circus must still go on. We are heading to another event, I'm sure, because as much as these events do sometimes seem annoying, as long as they make hundreds of millions of dollars, they're going to continue. And seeing as Jake Paul won by decision, they're definitely going to continue. I think I need to figure out what's next for Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley. That's what I'm going to be doing in today's video. Over here on this side, you've got Jake Paul. I think I'm going to figure out on this side what would be the most logical step for Jake Paul to take to make the most money without taking as much risk, but still take some risk at some points as well, because of course it is a boxing match. There's always going to be some kind of risk. This is the Jake Paul logical side of what I think he's going to do next in his business mind. Over here we've got the Tyron Woodley side, and Tyron Woodley as well. He needs to go on from here, because I doubt Woodley is going to retire from combat sports coming off of a loss to Jake Paul of all people. Don't get me wrong, coming off a loss to Vicente Luque and retiring is not the best either, but it's still Vicente Luque. Losing to Jake Paul, and that's when you call it quits. I don't see Tyron Woodley having the ego, or I think Tyron Woodley has such an ego, there's no way he's going to let himself lose to Jake Paul and then retire afterwards. And something I do want to mention as well, Tyron Woodley has a bit of a following now. He got a little bit of fanship from that event, because there are some people out there that are so delusional, and I know this sounds crazy, they're so delusional and biased against Jake Paul, they actually think Woodley kind of won. Like, I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy. But some people out there, majority of them on Twitter, genuinely believe Tyron Woodley's the real winner. So he's going to have a little bit of a following moving forwards that will pay attention. I think he needs to stay in the boxing world and keep doing this thing. Take some other fights that maybe don't make as much sense, but still have fun fights that are going to have a bit of a build-up and a lot of trash talking as well. And down here, we have the Jake Paul fast track option. This makes no sense whatsoever, but it's how he can achieve legacy and greatness in the shortest amount of time possible. That one's a little bit more of a joke section, but we'll get to that in a second. Starting with the Jake Paul logical side, over here on the left, I'm really looking forward to this one, because I think Jake Paul's going to take these steps next, and I can see them coming a mile away. I know a lot of people are talking about Tommy Fury. I've got the opponents ready to place in these boxes as we go through this video. I know people are talking about Tommy Fury. I'm telling you right now, he will not fight Tommy Fury, okay? First of all, it's a risky fight for him, and it's a big guy as well, with a lot of boxing experience that keeps getting better every single time. But second of all, I don't think him versus Tommy Fury really sells that much. Don't get me wrong, Tommy Fury's a big name, and he did just win on the same card as Jake Paul, and he got a bit of a spotlight there as well. A lot of views on his face-to-face with Anthony Taylor. I just don't feel like the build-up for Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury would be as exciting in any way as it would be if you collided two worlds, and I think Jake Paul knows that when it comes to pay-per-view dollars. Colliding two worlds in each combat sport, MMA and boxing, is what sells the most. You get the boxing fans, because they want to support you, because you're representing kind of the boxer out of the two people. Then you get all of the MMA fans involved as well. I mean, Ariel Helwani, Barboza versus Chikadze was on this weekend. Ariel Helwani was at the boxing event. Luke Thomas was at the boxing event. You know what I mean? All of these fake MMA reporters were over there covering the boxing event. Either way, Jake Paul should take on Michael Bisping next. And I know it sounds dumb, but this is genuinely what will happen. Say what you want. If Jake Paul offers Michael Bisping $3 million to fight him in a boxing match, Michael Bisping will say yes. Michael Bisping said yes a year ago to this, okay? A year ago, Michael Bisping was sitting on his podcast saying, I'll fight you, Jake Paul. Just give me the contract now and we'll get this going. He is so willing to take on Jake Paul. And I think now that Paul has beaten Tyron Woodley, he might really like his chances against Michael Bisping. And I think it's a very entertaining matchup. There'll be a massive build-up. And although people will say that Jake Paul will easily beat Michael Bisping, I do agree. I think that Jake Paul is genius in a way that he's going to let this thing sell and make people genuinely believe that Bisping has a chance, because guess what? Michael Bisping is way bigger than Tyron Woodley. Michael Bisping is bigger than Jake Paul as well, by the way. He's a former champion in the UFC. He's a big name. He can market a fight like a motherfucker. We've seen that many times in Michael Bisping's career. He can talk shit with the best of them in the UFC and the combat sports world in general. So I'll tell you this, when people see the face-off, and see Bisping taller than Jake Paul, and see Bisping tear apart Jake Paul in the build-up, and completely verbally ridicule him in every single moment they have, people will start to believe that Bisping's about to fuck up Jake Paul, and Jake Paul will sell that. He will sell that to everyone, and people will buy that. And I think that Michael Bisping is definitely going to be next for him. And Michael Bisping was cage side for Paul versus Woodley and said in an interview, give me a couple beers, I'll fucking jump in there and beat the shit out of him. He kind of feels that he could beat Jake Paul. Let's make that match up next. I know it would shame MMA even more, and there's people disliking this video right now. I'm telling you, this is what Jake Paul's going to do. It's not what I want to happen. This is what Jake Paul is going to do. Moving on from the Michael Bisping fight, I feel like Jake Paul's then going to move on to take on a man who's also very famous, Mr. KSI. I tried to find a flattering angle. I didn't really want his bandana on because it kind of covered up a good, accurate representation of who he is. But I really tried to crop out some of the forehead, but it's just there, and you can't really deal with it. But either way, KSI, Jake Paul, I think would be next if Jake Paul wins another fight. Jake Paul wins another fight. KSI said he wants one fight, and if he wins that one fight, he'll then go after Jake Paul. This is the biggest fight. People are going to be like, who's KSI right now? An MMA fan is watching this channel right now going, who the fuck is KSI? This is a dumb list. He should take on Tommy Fury, then Canelo. Hold out for a second, okay? KSI is definitely someone Jake Paul's interested in. And plus, KSI when Jake Paul is the A side of the negotiations. That would sell more than Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley. 100%, because KSI brings an audience Jake Paul's size, probably even bigger than Jake Paul's size as well, because KSI is going platinum in the UK. He's shit at music, but he's just got the fan base to just do whatever they follow whatever he does. So KSI Jake Paul would break all of the records in my opinion. KSI versus Austin McBroom in the meantime. KSI beats him. Who knows? I think he would beat him. He's bigger. I think he's better at boxing than him as well. KSI beats Austin McBroom in his own event in London. Jake Paul fights Michael Bisping in America, in Cleveland, Ohio. Who cares? Then they match up against each other. And then we start talking about, at the end of all of that, Jake Paul takes on a man by the name of, and I know it sounds dumb, but this is the world we're in, Floyd Mayweather. And you know what, yeah? After watching, if we're to believe that Mayweather versus Paul was a legit fight, Mayweather could lose that. And I know that sounds crazy, but Jake Paul's a lot bigger than him. And he's way better at boxing than Logan Paul. And I gave Logan Paul 3 rounds against Mayweather. I gave him 3 rounds. 2 definitely, but 3 maybe. And Mayweather's just going to get a little bit older. And by the time these first 2 matchups have happened between him and Bisping and between him and KSI, Mayweather's going to be even older. And when he's older, he's going to be even poorer and even more in need of money. He goes through it like fucking water. I feel like Jake Paul, if he beats these 2 men, he's going to forget about McGregor. That ain't a matchup that I think he's going to go for. I think he's going to look for Mayweather. And then people will say, oh, you haven't taken on a real boxer. But Mayweather will silence all of those critics. Because if they say that Mayweather isn't a real boxer, who is in the sport of boxing? Let's be real. So, I think Jake Paul takes on Bisping, calls out KSI. KSI beats Austin McBroom in London. They make Jake Paul versus KSI. Then they make Jake Paul versus Mayweather. And I genuinely think he has a bit of a chance because of how shit Mayweather looked against Logan Paul. And how old he looked as well. And if you're saying that, oh, Mayweather versus Paul was rigged though. It was rigged. That's why Mayweather looked that bad. If you think that one was rigged, it was a pro fight. This one will be as well. You know what I'm saying? So, Jake Paul Mayweather at the end of that storyline. Moving on to Tyron Woodley. Let's get straight to him. Tyron Woodley embarrassed the sport of MMA. Embarrassed himself afterwards. 39-year-old getting a tattoo on his leg saying, I love Jake Paul, just at a chance of a rematch like an absolute soy boy bitch. No offense though, he had a good showing. He actually won some rounds. Didn't win the fight in any way whatsoever if you have eyes. I thought he lost 6 of the rounds very clearly. Maybe there's an argument he only lost 5. Either way, he loses very clearly to Jake Paul. Tyron Woodley needs to keep going in this boxing sphere. He has nothing else to go to. I think he's got a little bit of name value, and I honestly believe if Woodley's on the card of Jake Paul's versus Michael Bisping, there's going to be hype around Woodley's fight, and I think he should take on a man by the name of Dylan fucking Dennis. I can see this so easily. Dylan Dennis has been calling out Woodley before. He's called out Woodley many times. He started shit talk with Woodley many times. Woodley versus Dylan Dennis, face-to-face interview, would hit 1 million views. It would sell massively. People would be very interested by it. Everyone wants to see Dylan Dennis get KO'd. I say, Jake Paul, fork out some more money on your card. Give Woodley 2 million. Give Dylan Dennis 500,000. and you've got yourself a fucking undercard fight for yourself. Tyron Woodley, Dylan Dennis. I think Dylan Dennis ain't going to go back to MMA. I really don't see that happening. I think he'll try his hand out in the boxing ring a little bit because that's what he seems more interested in recently. Let's do Tyron Woodley versus Dylan Dennis. Woodley's 0-1 in boxing. Dennis is 0-0. It kind of makes sense. I think there'd be some good beef, and I think that Woodley just needs to get a couple of wins against some people that he can win against, because I really do believe he'd just destroy Dylan Dennis, get a highlight reel KO, and then start working his way sort of back towards a rematch with Jake Paul, another fight with a bigger name in the boxing world, a bigger name in the influencer world maybe as well. I think Woodley has a real place in this sphere of existence. As much as I hate all of this is what I think Woodley's going to do. These are not my opinions on what he should do. This is what I think Woodley's going to consider now that he knows there's no rematch with Jake Paul. Let's be real, he lost clearly. Moving on, another thing in Woodley's career that he's going to go for, if he does beat Dylan Dennis, which I think he easily will by KO, Rory McDonald. Lost to him before. There's going to be some hunger there for Tyron Woodley to get that win back in any way that he can. Rory McDonald's career just got fucking derailed, by the way. Lost to John Gotti Jr. The third. Sorry. Not good for Rory McDonald. Before that, I lost to Gleason Tebow. I know he won the fight against Gleason Tebow, but still, he's no longer really worth that much in these regional promotions because they've had him lose to all of their guys now. They've had him lose to John Gotti III. So that's no longer big value on Rory McDonald's name. I think if Woodley beat Dylan Dennis and Rory wanted to try his hand out in boxing, this is what I would go for. Tyron Woodley, Rory McDonald, two legends, trying out a boxing match on a Jake Paul undercard, maybe the Jake Paul KSI undercard. You can literally just have these guys follow each other around, constantly be backstage at each other's events, constantly have interactions and face-offs and moments that they have a massive like argument backstage and a scuffle. This is how you sell these absolute shit shows. Tyron Woodley, Rory McDonald, and the last step in Tyron Woodley's redemption arc is this. Now, hear me out, okay? The man I'm about to bring out here will take on one fight in the meantime. Then he will take this fight with Woodley. Logan Paul. The storyline is there. He is the brother of Jake Paul. Him and Woodley got into a little bit of an argument after the fight with Jake Paul as well, and he told Logan Paul to fall back, stay out of this, and Logan Paul was saying, you're delusional, we won clearly, we just gave you your chance. Like, there's a little bit of beef between them, a little bit of heat between them as well. I genuinely believe this is the way that Woodley can get back to a Jake Paul rematch, or to a big fight in the boxing world against a boxing name. I think Woodley should do this. Easy money, Woodley. Destroy Dylan Dennis, get $2 million. Another undercard of Jake Paul. Destroy Rory McDonald, get $2 million. Another undercard. Or maybe your own card with Logan Paul. It could be a main event at this point. If Woodley really wants to make big millions at this point in his career, this is the route he should go down. Get 2 wins in a row, get 2 KOs. He might not even beat Rory McDonald, by the way, but it'd be a fun match and a rematch as well with some history behind it. Tyron Woodley, Rory McDonald, then takes on Logan Paul at the end of it all in the main event of his own show. People would tune in. Logan Paul's the worst boxer out of the two of them between him and Jake Paul. I think Woodley would have a better chance against Logan Paul than Jake Paul. He is quite small, but that would be a big storyline. David versus Goliath. I think that Tyron Woodley should go down this pathway. Dylan Dennis, Rory McDonald, Logan Paul. Moving on to the last one, the Jake Paul fast track. The one that makes zero sense whatsoever, but neither does the existence of this fight between Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley anyway. So, Jake Paul fast track. It makes no sense, but I'm telling you this could be a potential reality. As much as people would hate to admit it, Floyd Mayweather could be next. And he could beat him. And this is really exposing every sport. Jake Paul could beat Floyd. Floyd looks so shit against Logan Paul, man. I know Logan Paul's bigger than Jake Paul, but man, Jake Paul is a much better boxer by far in every single way. He actually has a good jab, goes to the body a little bit as well. Floyd Mayweather's going to be another year older at this point whenever this fight happens, maybe next year in 2022 at February or something like that. After Christmas, they start a training camp. Jake Paul, Floyd Mayweather next could be the reality that we live in, and if Jake Paul wins that one, he could very well look for afterwards. And I know people say this is crazy, but maybe he doesn't even want to win. Maybe he just wants to say that he did it, and he tried, and he went in there with the best, and he made $100 million. Maybe the objective at the end of this all is not to win, but just to be put somewhere in legacy. And this would be great for boxing as well, by the way, because this man would beat the living shit out of Jake Paul. Canelo Alvarez. You know why this makes sense? If Paul somehow manages to beat Mayweather, which is a reality that exists and you know it is, if Paul somehow beats Mayweather, Canelo lost to Mayweather. Canelo will see that as a chance to also simultaneously kind of get one over on Mayweather and wipe that little bit off of his record. If Paul really beats Mayweather, I really believe Canelo will definitely consider taking on Jake Paul. The money will be there. Caleb Plant is a good matchup, don't get me wrong. It's a great fight, pretty competitive. It's not going to sell the way these other matchups are. Jake Paul could beat Mayweather and then look for a matchup with Canelo. And this is the fucking shit show of a world we are in. And I hate it. But this is the reality. And I'll make videos getting views from it as well. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye. God help us all.